what used to be a piece of plastic or on the radome and a bunch of PCBs and bent metal now is a very sophisticated piece of electronic gear that every operator around the world depends on, and for obviously some of the suppliers here who are making those products. So I just have a very quick session to go over some of the trends with regards to spectrum and what's happening, what's going on with mobile broadband from a technology perspective and how that may impact antennas, and then what is obviously happening in the very high frequency bands that we've been doing field trials over here, and it really isn't LMDS2 as we were thinking about before, and how is that going to be impacting the industry with regards to testing of some of these solutions that are out there. And I think test is going to be one of the major areas that some of the speakers may be discussing later on today in terms of above 6 gigahertz and how do we effectively test some of these systems. So we have this is a repeat of a slide that I did back in November, but in the purple there I highlighted some of the new areas of activity. So back then we obviously had not finished the 600 megahertz auction from the FCC, and so that's out of the way and done now. Now the question is what kind of antenna topologies are we going to support down at 550 megahertz all the way up into the mid 6s and upper 6s for that spectrum. Band 14 for AT&T has now been awarded for FirstNet, and again the question becomes for AT&T, depending on which states are opting in or opting out, or regardless of if they're opting in or opting out, what are they going to be doing with regards to their antenna strategy and their one-touch focus in terms of getting to the site, and what does that mean for the industry as we move forward and adding band 14 out there from a network side. And we're not going to talk about obviously any of the antennas or anything that go onto the vehicular or for the handhelds, for the dual mode LTE P25 products that are going to be out there. But just from a networking side, where does it make sense to do 2x2 versus 4x4 with regards to band 14 for AT&T specifically? And then CBRS is again another hot topic now that we have some of the initial databases set up and some of the administrators set up and have done their interoperability testing. How quickly do we roll out CBRS? So from a recap of the 600 megahertz winners, T-Mobile obviously bet big on 600 megahertz and bet big in terms of actual depth of spectrum. So their nationwide footprint is primarily 15 to 20 megahertz in every market that they got, including Puerto Rico, and that was very important for them. And if you've seen over the last couple of weeks, some of the information coming out of T-Mobile is that they're going to be focusing their 5G on 600 megahertz. So the question is how does that happen? Or how is that going to work out for them? And what are they, again, defining as 5G? With regards to speeds and anything related to current 3G PP specifications, etc. Dish is again out there trying to hoard as much spectrum as possible, and again their nationwide footprint was a little bit less deep, 5 to 10 megahertz, and there's numerous maps out there on the internet that you can pull up that'll give you the actual footprint by market. I obviously didn't want to go through all of that here and repeat that, but you can certainly look those up to see where they focused on, but specifically for Dish, the 20 megahertz that they got in New York City, 15 megahertz in San Francisco, and in the Miami metro market were some of the key areas that they were wanting to focus on, that they went deeper in terms of their bidding. AT&T just went into certain select markets and certainly did not go after a nationwide footprint. And then we have Comcast now from the cable side getting back into it, just originally in AWS-1, if you remember, they had bid on some markets, got some spectrum, trialed LTE, and decided that it really wasn't for them, and didn't end up deploying it. And I think Verizon ended up getting most of the spectrum that the cable guys had paid for back at AWS-1. So again, as we look into 5G and we look into what's really driving all of this, I think the key point is again to look at the displays on your television, look at the displays on your devices, And as we go from 1080p video to 2K displays to 4K, the 4K is really the magic number that I talked about before, and I don't think my views have changed on that as we go forward, in that we will have 4K handsets coming out by the end of this year, and that will be a major driver for trying to do gigabit LTE as we get the higher speeds of mobile broadband. US Cellular, again, got certain markets that they were targeting, primarily in the Midwest, where they're obviously located, but also some on the West Coast, and then pretty much in the North Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia areas. And then C Spire, again, because of where they're based, pretty much focused on Mississippi. So band 14 is interesting because now we're adding yet another band at 700 where we have more radios. And these are obviously narrowband radios, so we could have band 12, we can have band 14, we can have 850, and we can have a whole bunch of low band radios now that potentially are going to be 2x2 or 4x4. One of the things back in November of last year that was discussed was, would going to 4x4 really be a high band only situation for most of the operators around the world? And the thinking was before Mobile World Congress in Barcelona earlier this year, that we really were only going to try to focus on 19, 2100, and maybe 2600 if you're international or in Canada, to do 4x4, and we were going to leave the low band to kind of at 2x2 for a variety of different reasons. But for any of you that went to Barcelona, it was very compelling to see every network equipment provider show a 4x4 low band remote radio unit at the show. So every single vendor had 800, had 900 4x4, had 700 4x4. So that really, from my perspective, coupled with the fact that if you want to do gigabit LTE and 3-carrier aggregation, you needed one low band that had to have the 4x4. So that changed the way the port counts are going to look like now on the antennas from what I was thinking of back in November to where I think things are going to be now as we move forward from 2017 and beyond. So that was a major change, at least from my perspective, in leaving Barcelona, in upgrading the low band from a 2x2 only to a 4x4 configuration. At least one of those bands, if not more. If we go back to, again, band 14, we have this 90-day opt-in, opt-out period for all of the states to decide how they're going to build their own network. They're going to go onto the AT&T network. And certainly, even if they opt out, it doesn't mean that AT&T won't build in that market, because one of the stipulations for band 14 is that they get to use it and share it with the first responders. So if there's no first responders there, they get all that spectrum. So they're going to be deploying to every market in every of 50 states, regardless of if the states opt in or opt out. They're going to be deploying probably 4x4 where it makes sense in the dense urban markets, and probably 2x2 in the rural markets. And again, all of this will start to happen sometime this year, sometime at the end of this year. It really depends on who you talk to, and if you're talking to corporate AT&T, if you're talking to some of the regional markets, and what everyone is saying. But it's certainly moving forward. There are still some legal issues, I think, that are not resolved yet between the states and FirstNet that have to go through at least some consultation with the FCC and how things are going to work out. But I think we're going to see things move forward very quickly. And again, I think this adds another 5 to 10 megahertz of bandwidth for AT&T to again use for carrier aggregation in those markets. And because it's low band, it's going to be very helpful for them to supplement their existing 700 and 850. CBRS, Spectrum Access System, the database that the admins are going to be focusing on to make sure that if the Navy decides that they're going to turn on their radar, everyone gets off of that channel and gets onto another channel, and they can shut down their transmitters. So we have admins now that have been designated. We actually have inter-op testing that's been done by Federated and Google. So things are moving forward. And again, would expect that we'll have more trials from Multi-Fire Alliance and from some of the other organizations out there that are dealing with CBRS as we continue to move forward through the end of this year and accelerating in 2018.